Hello and welcome to another episode of Every Possible Angle. I'm very excited today to be joined by Sharon Klarman. She is the Executive Director of Solid Organ Transplant at Tufts Medical Center. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
It's fascinating. Your program is doing some amazing things that have been growing incredibly in the last couple of years. But I'd love to start by learning a little bit about your role for the rest of the audience here, but also how you got into transplant. What was your story? What initially kicked you off to get into transplant?
Sure. Well, I was at Northeastern University as an undergrad in nursing, had wanted to get into labor and delivery, actually, and was matched with the heart transplant program at Tufts as a new grad nurse, and really spent my first few years of nursing on a transplant unit. And now being back at Tufts, I'm actually working again with some of the nurses and physicians who were my mentors more than 20 years ago.
Oh, that's amazing. That's incredible. And so we get those first moments in transplant, and you didn't go back into labor and delivery. You felt this was your space.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just so impressive when we see both the patients with chronic illness and those who come in with acute onset of illness and just the transformation that occurs with transplant.
It's absolutely incredible the change that patients go through before transplant, that the end stage disease to post transplant. And as a nurse, you must have been very hands on with that. But at what point did you choose to get into administration? And what has that transition been like?
Yeah. Well, I spent a few years in Boston as a nurse, and then actually went out to California. I was at Cedars-Sinai for almost 10 years. And I think was very lucky to be exposed to a high volume program. There started developing an interest in policy development and program development. And again, was really lucky to have some wonderful mentors. And then when I went back east to Yale, again, saw opportunities to really explore my interest in efficiency and team development, and apply that to the transplant space in the role of an administrator.
And in terms of team development, this is such an important leadership role. You touch so many aspects of transplant. And in a lot of my conversations, particularly with surgeons and physicians around transplant, they discuss how it's so much more interdisciplinary and so much more of a team sport than other areas of medicine. And particularly for you in your role, can you speak a little bit about what that looks like, about what team means for you?
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I think transplant is such a dynamic, multidisciplinary area of healthcare. And it's part of the area that I've really enjoyed because I'm able to see perspectives from social workers and dietitians and pharmacists. And through everybody's lens, they're seeing different cases and situations differently. And I think to be able to be in a role to listen and harness that expertise into making really comprehensive plans for patients is a really rewarding element of what I do.
That's fantastic. Can I ask you, you spoke about efficiency, and obviously Tufts been growing, especially in an interdisciplinary team, disciplinary team. That requires a whole host of areas and looking into where your bottlenecks are. How do you approach that, especially as you came back to Tufts a few years ago, looking for how a program, what is limiting a program, and what are ways to get more efficient and better? You clearly built out a great team, and they're growing incredibly well.
Yeah. I look at it from the perspective of someone once told me, as a leader, you take really great care of your team, and your team will take really great care of the patients that you're caring for. So when we're looking at ways to improve efficiency or build out programs, I think my role is really to get the right folks together in a room and listen. We do a lot of mapping of current state and then getting together with leaders and saying, where do we want to be in 90 days? Where do we want to be in 6 months? And then really identifying, what tools or processes, technology we need. And a lot of times it's what people do we need to get us there. So I think that's been the most rewarding part of being at Tufts for the last 2 years is seeing all of that work come to fruition with a lot of program growth.
I think you're now the largest heart transplant program in New England. Is that right? Yeah, cool. Congratulations. And you've just started the liver program as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we relaunched the liver program in 2023, which was a large initiative for Tufts Medicine. We saw a need in the communities that we serve and some of our partnering hospitals within our health system. And I think, I'm lucky to be at an organization where the C-suite really appreciates transplant and sees the impact of the services we provide and made the decision to invest into opening a liver program.
I'm curious how that interaction with the C-suite goes, because while certainly many hospital systems see the importance of transplant, it's also a big investment, right?
Correct.
It is not a simple thing to undertake, especially opening up a new transplant discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about are the challenges or hurdles or the support that you get from the C-suite and how that interface goes in your role as a transplant administrator?
Yeah. I think at Tufts, I'm lucky that our CEO came from a hospital that had a large transplant program, and he really understands the work that we're doing. But it's a lot of moving pieces and being able to translate that into language that the C-suite can understand. So it's partnering with different elements from our rev cycle and rev integrity teams and our Medicare cost report teams, kind of all those people that are behind the scenes in really successful transplant programs and making sure that we're also getting them to the table so that we can translate the work that we're doing into growth opportunities for the health system, downstream revenue, and really ways that we can reinvest into the services that we're providing at Tufts.
That's got to be challenging. Some of those areas that you just mentioned and can be sort of behind the scenes and not necessarily get the voice or the seat at the table. For you, it seems that, like you said, taking care of the team, it sounds like driving a very mission-driven program and giving voice to all of the different players is really one of the keys for you for success.
Correct. Yeah, I think, coming in as a new staff member at Tufts 2 years ago, I made it a point to introduce myself and make sure that, the financial coordinators and all of my different partners on the finance side knew how to reach me, felt like they could bring observations or concerns to me. And then we've really built out these dynamic meetings where we talk about opportunities for improvement or translation of data within our EMR, ways to improve our billing cycles. But I think for me, it's really being a facilitator and connecting the right people. I'm basically a producer, I think, in transplant.
That's excellent. I think the data piece is really interesting. I know you have a team very involved with data. I believe in the past you've been involved with modules for EHRs around data. How important is that in transplant to an efficient program and a successful program?
Yeah. So one of my rules is we don't operate on hunches. And I think I'm always looking for ways to leverage all of the different data points that we gather in transplant to make better informed decisions about how we're managing our program, about how we're moving forward. But creating really dynamic data teams, I think, has been critical to our success. And I've been lucky enough that our data folks also have clinical backgrounds. So they're able to help me translate all of the different data endpoints to our clinical team so that we can continue to make good, positive decisions for the program.
And again, it's one of those roles that isn't on the forefront when you think of transplant and transplant programs, but for you, it's a critical piece of the backbone to make happen.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we use data in so many aspects of what we're doing, and our robust EHRs now allow us to really look at such granular timestamps and data points that in transplant, when we're looking at the moving pieces of both the donor and the recipient, being able to leverage both sets of data and then bring them together to provide us with some meaningful use of that information has been really important.
Which I think is, in some ways, a trickier place in medicine than most, because you're not just relying on your hospital's data. You're relying on not just multiple hospitals, but multiple organizations, OPOs, potentially third-party procurement teams, transportation teams, all sorts of groups who are involved with executing that, and you have to pull all of that data together to make a successful transplant.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think my team, our approach, at least at our meetings, is to never say we can't, or that's not something we can do, or not something we have, but we truly try to say, how do we do it? How can we gather that information? Do we need to create a new data field? And I'm thankful to work with a lot of people that are really solution-based folks, which has made my job a lot easier.
That's fantastic. And now at an even larger level of being involved with the mission of Transplant, if I understand right, you are part of the Transplant Administrator Committee and as part of OPTN. And so I'd imagine that also is hopefully a very data-driven role to help advance the whole field. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, no matter where you are in the country as an administrator, you're facing a lot of the same challenges and having to make the same difficult decisions of how do we expand access, increase utilization, but remain financially sound as hospitals and transplant centers. So it's been a privilege to serve on the OPTN committees and get to collaborate more with peers from across the country. But yeah, data is always something all of us are looking for.
Absolutely. And I think something you touched on, I think some of the changes that have gone on in the last few years around allocation policy, they have wonderful mission as Transplant does to drive better equity and access, more national sharing. But obviously, there are one of the keys to Transplant to be successful is it has to be, at the end of the day, it has to be financially solvent and sustainable. What are in the changing landscape, some of the approaches that you're taking to make scalability of your program solvent for the C-suite, for the hospital, so that you can continue on your mission?
Yeah, I think no one would argue that broader sharing and soon continuous distribution is the right thing for us to be doing in Transplant and, really what we are tasked with doing for the patients that we're taking care of. But if you step back as an administrator, you also have to look at the economics of what we're doing. And I think looking at opportunities to be more efficient when it comes to logistics, how we're leveraging, perfusion and preservation devices. And for us, it's been also leveraging procurement teams to help us do those recoveries. Quite often, launching teams that are in closer proximity to the donor hospital while still being able to keep my team back at Tufts doing their standard cardiac or hepatobiliary surgeries while we have a trusted partner doing some of those recoveries for us.
And so I know our surgical services team works with Tufts, and we're very honored to have that responsibility. And I'm curious on your side, by having your team, you mentioned them being focused on the transplant side. How does that affect sort of the stability of the program, the ability for them to execute on the transplants, and then also ripple effects? Because obviously, especially with longer distances, if you are going yourselves, that's a lot of time away from a program and a lot of other procedures, sort of the opportunity cost of all of the procedures that could be done for these other patients while their team's out recovering an organ. Yeah,
no, I mean, I think when we looked at it and made the decision to, work with companies like yourself, it was, identifying how many cross-country recoveries our team had been doing and putting our own surgeons on a flight, bidirectionally for 12 hours really didn't make the most sense for that surgeon. So we felt that there was more value for them to be on campus, doing their standard cardiac surgeries or actually resting before they're about to do a few transplants than being on a jet going back and forth.
And I think that makes so much sense. I think one of the things these allocation policies have done, like you said, there's the moral intent for us to do them is critical, but then it's taking a good amount of innovation for teams to figure out the right ways to do that and how to be effective, because the rules change, the distances are longer, and that's more burden from teams. But I think I also find there's new innovative approaches that people are taking to solve those problems. In some ways, it's making us all more efficient.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting when you see the timing of, broader sharing really being put into effect, coupled with, all of us going through a a national pandemic at the same time, it really put us in a position where we had to begin to rethink how we were doing these recoveries and begin to trust other local teams to partner with us to be more efficient. And I think if there's one thing that's come out of these, events in the past few years, it's been that, partnering and improving communication and collaboration to get the right organ to the right patient really at the right time.
I actually remember I just started at Paragonix just before the pandemic, and I remember during the pandemic, the first case we were involved in where a local team recovered a heart, and it was because during the pandemic, the team wasn't allowed to travel in for spread of the virus, and how novel that was, that to instead of having a team get on a private charter jet, fly out and back for the whole procedure, was the standard, and it forced this new way of thinking, and it was really interesting to me how, like you said, it in some ways drove new innovation and sort of necessity is the mother of invention kind of environment, right?
Yeah, and I think it fostered a lot of focus on collaboration and opportunities for improved communication with local teams. And I think as we're working with more OPOs with broader sharing, these are things that are just naturally evolving and something that we need to be able to adapt to.
And so we've spoken a little bit about the heart program and the liver program, but you also have a large kidney program. In terms of the kidney program, kidney just recently in the last 2 years has gone through its own allocation change. Similarly, historically, the kidney programs worked very locally with a local OPO, and now the challenge is to work further. How is that? Do you see it similar or different, or is there unique challenges to kidney versus heart, lung, and liver?
Yeah, I mean, I think renal and extra-renal have their differences, but we're definitely communicating with more OPOs on a daily basis and seeing, slight differences in practice or documentation. But again, it's a lot of identifying ways to efficiently transport those organs across the country as we're, doing more broader sharing.
Absolutely. And towards communication, where do you see, I think, forefronts of needs for communication? I think there's, without a doubt, more and more involvement with less and less familiar parties on such a critical. So I think you kind of spoke to it. There's differences in documentation. There's differences in approach and protocols. Do you see more standardization coming about? Do you see new approaches towards communication and technology? I think you and I were speaking a few weeks ago about programs implementing Zoom calls for all, because it's not just the Tufts team coming out. There's multiple different
pre-recovery calls.
Absolutely. There's multiple different surgical teams coming in, working with an OPO, a local center. Do you see things like that becoming more standard?
Yeah. No, I think, standardization of the information that we're looking at is step one.
Right.
But then improving the ways that we are efficiently exchanging that information, I think is another opportunity that we have in transplant right now. There's still a lot of manual exchange of information that I think, right now at different meetings and with different teams, we're discussing ways that maybe things could be automated or that communication can be more streamlined, especially when both OPOs and transplant centers are both becoming much busier.
Absolutely. I'm curious, one of the things in kidney that is a little bit different with the new one of the things that's coming out is automated filters. How do you see that affecting your program? Are you ready for it? Are you making considerations around it?
Yeah, so at Tufts, we implemented filters 2 years ago. I'm a big proponent of knowing who you are and knowing what you actually do, and really setting your program up for accepting organ offers that you will reasonably transplant, but not casting a net in a way that you're hurting the efficiency of the whole system. So the right organ should get to the right program and that patient that will actually be able to use it. So we've seen a lot of improvement with just the volume of organ offers that we've had by setting realistic filters. And I think we've improved our overall organ offer acceptance. And then Our team also right now is focused on using decline reports to look at the organ offers that we haven't accepted, and seeing, is there an opportunity to use that type of organ in the future, or was this a patient level decision that we made? And I think making people feel comfortable to sit around a table and look at this data together and then make decisions about maybe ways we need to rethink what we're doing has been really valuable as a team that's gone through a lot of growth over the past 2 years.
I have to imagine, technologies like the Paragonix systems are enabling longer distance recoveries, longer ischemic times to cast a larger net. With that also means potentially screening more offers. And so getting very precise and understanding exactly where you are, where on the margin you could potentially grow, looking at those decline, to stay efficient. I think that, you could take a brute force approach and just say we're just going to throw more bodies at it. But it sounds like you're taking an approach of really trying to be precise with the tools so that you're not overwhelmed with offers while still being able to cast a large net geographically and look for the organs that best suit your patients. Is that a fair understanding?
Yeah, definitely. For extrarenal organs, our travel distance is 3,500 nautical miles. So our team is the whole country. So, we're receiving a lot of organ offers, and, over time trying to predict how our volumes will increase, and then making sure that we're both staffing up with the right amount of coordinators to be able to triage those offers and put in timely responses, but also creating workflows and decision algorithms so that we're efficiently exchanging information with both our surgical team and the OPOs, so that we can identify, what preservation or perfusion device we're going to use, which recovery team is going to go out and recover a particular organ for us. And I think it's still a work in progress, but I think the work that we're doing is moving us in the right direction.
Oh, it clearly is. Your program's doing great. You're growing incredibly well. Can I ask you, in terms of looking at some of those larger offers, and I'm curious how that is a dynamic picture, because both the potential donor does change over the course of 48 hours, but even a recipient who you may consider this donor for or not consider a donor for 1 week to next week may change. I've heard pushback from the clinical side of saying, well, it's hard to use things like filters because I 1 week I might consider an organ that I didn't consider the week before.
Yeah.
Do you still find a way to work with the teams and challenge each other appropriately to find the ways to use these tools correctly?
Yeah, I think, if we look at kidney filters through the OPTN, those are kind of kidney filters 2.0. There's more data variables to use, more combinations, more predictive information that we're able to receive and review. With extrarenal organs, the filters are a little bit more limited. So we're really saying extreme cases that we would not accept. So I think over time, hopefully as more discrete data fields are incorporated into those filters, there'll be additional opportunities. But right now for liver and for heart, those filters have, I would say, more minimal use than what we see within kidney.
Interesting. Coming back to the comment about sort of using the right tools at the right time, I've certainly heard from some transplant administrators concerns about the increase in the number of tools available and the increase in the number of preservation devices, services, things like that in terms of the sustainability of the program. You seem to feel that you can use these tools and find the right tool for the job to accomplish what you need to do and do it in a sustainable way and find where it's going to make a cost-effective impact to your program. Can you tell me a little bit how you think about that, how you approach that thought process?
Yeah, no, I think we've seen just through UNOS and the OBTN, there's been a lot more data through the data service portal becoming available, truly month by month. I think it's taking time to get the right people together and look at the tools and see, what is the intent of this tool? What is it trying to tell us? And then look at the information that it's sharing with us and say, how can this be meaningful for me? What information am I able to gather to reflect more on my program and our practices? And then also see which tools complement one another, because that's the other key, is pairing the right tools together. So for kidney, you're looking at your probability report, which patients have the highest probability of being in range for organ offers. And then you're looking at your CARES report and really seeing, are those the patients that I'm seeing on match runs, and what type of organs am I accepting for them? And then you look at your filters and you say, if we're not willing to accept that type of organ for this particular patient, do we have a way to modify their donor acceptance criteria in a way that is also informed consent for the patient, right? Because those are components, I think, that are not always fully transparent to patients, but something that we really strive to do at Tufts in terms of educating the patients about the types of donor offers that they may get and letting them know when we think we should cast that net a little bit wider for them, or in certain circumstances where we need to, tighten it up a little bit.
That must be very challenging, I would imagine, because particularly for your heart program, I'd imagine, those patients are very sick, and the decision making on accepting an organ is somewhat immediate, although they're going to have the impacts of that decision for a long time. Yeah. In terms of how the team approaches at Tufts, it sounds like a real philosophy around that informed consent, around types of donor and donor risk you're willing to accept, types of preservation or approach that you're going to take. How do you approach that?
Yeah. I think it's continuously providing education to patients and their caregivers, and realizing that, at the point of the patient's illness that they're coming into your hospital, they can feel overwhelmed. They're getting a lot of information at once. But it's really been working with our nurse coordinators and our physicians that are meeting with the patients and their family members to say, how do we introduce this education early on? And then how do we continuously revisit this information? And if you look at transplant, going back to 2014, pre-Harvoni, Hep C, accepting those type of organs, which is now really a standard of care, right? Yeah. And then seeing the same thing with, DCD hearts and where we were 3 years ago compared to where we are now, with even just the information and the data and the outcome data that we can provide to patients. So I think we're seeing a lot of elements evolve from individual case-by-case decisions more to standard of care within transplant centers as well.
There's so many things changing right now. The allocation changes, new technologies, new approaches. NRP is a big area of the field. Where do you see as some of the big forefronts for transplant to continue to push the envelope and to continue to grow and improve its efficiency and serve more patients?
Yeah, I think, all of the surgical recovery approaches like NRP, perfusion and preservation devices are enabling us to be able to do continuous distribution, right? Without these tools, without these devices, it's really nearly impossible to travel across the country with a heart. So I think as allocation continues to evolve, the way that we think about deploying teams, the devices that we're using has to be very strategic and has to really be based upon both clinical data, but also operational and logistical information. So it's really appreciating and partnering with the people that know a lot more about logistics than I do, and getting their input so that we can best set our team up for success.
And one of the things I really appreciate in transplant is the fact that there are so many. It's such a mission-driven community. There are so many players with such different roles, but we can work together. Achieve things like these, like continuous distribution. If we bring the right tools to the table, whether that's communication tools or preservation tech tools, transportation innovations, the way filters and data are applied, we can potentially achieve the best of all worlds. We can potentially get organs to the patients who need it, who are sickest, and we can also still do this efficiently and successfully to make transplant programs sustainable and successful and able to grow.
Yeah, and I think it's the balance in transplant where, at our organization, certainly a lot of focus on improved utilization of deceased donor organs, and that's really I think a national goal for all of us right now. But we're also simultaneously looking at improving access to the transplant center. So we can't just look at access to the organ itself, but also all of the patients that we're serving in underserved populations and vulnerable areas, and finding ways to partner with the community to improve the patient's access to our program, and actually getting the patient into our doors and being able to offer them a transplant as a treatment option.
Could you tell me a little more about that? I think it's interesting in Massachusetts and New England. There are several transplant programs in southern New England, but New England's a pretty large area, not compared to some of the parts of the country, but some of the rest of New England, the northern areas of the states, Vermont and northern Maine and New Hampshire, are not very accessible, either financially or by transport. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about how your program is trying to be able to serve a larger community.
Yeah. So I think the strategy at Tufts that certainly predates my arrival, Dr. D'Onofrio and our heart failure team, I think we're really at the forefront of saying, in order to improve access to our program, we have to partner with other centers in areas like Vermont and Maine and Rhode Island, and partner with different providers and locations to really create this shared care model where they're taking care of patients, during the pre-evaluation phase and then while the patient's waitlisted, but knowing that we're a partner and that they're communicating with us. And then the same goes for post-transplant, and realizing that it's not easy for patients to travel hours back and forth for transplant care, but how do we collaborate and educate local teams to partner with them on that transplant journey? And I think that's really been the core of our success at Tufts, is this really dynamic structure of shared care models.
That's really interesting to me, because that is a way to reach a lot more patients, and because transplant, unlike a lot of other procedures, it's not a single moment. It's a continuum of care before the transplant, and then obviously for the lifetime of the patient after that. In terms of building these partnerships and sustaining them, I would imagine there's potentially a virtuous circle from what you're going through, that by growing the volume of Tufts and being able to serve more patients, those programs have more experience. They're going to have more, so they're going to get more comfortable. So does this have an impact? Does the growth of the Tufts program also help the partner programs be able to care for and assess patients who are potentially eligible for transplant?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think so. But we've created really nice relationships where we also have symposiums where we gather together with our different shared care centers and review data and literature together, are able to answer questions that they may have about program developments. Most recently, we did a lot of lectures on NRP and making sure that, when we're tossing out these different words, that our partnering organizations understand some of these recovery modalities. And then we actually have teams come and spend some time with us on our own campus, and, sit in on selection committee meetings and round with us, and be able to really experience being at a transplant center firsthand. And then we have a really great team of coordinators that stay in really close communication with other nurses and APPs at other transplant centers, and our providers have the same relationship with those referring physicians.
This is an amazing approach. I think for many people, they might not realize how novel this is, because for much of medicine, it's a very pay-for procedure type work. And what all of that you described sounds so critical to the function of transplant, but these are not reimbursable activities.
Right.
And so the transplant program, and then eventually the C-suite leadership, has to have that vision that this is worthwhile investment in order to keep this whole network of community as educated on the latest of evidence-based medicine, in order to help the program treat more patients. That must have some amount of challenges to express to leadership that have the importance of this. Do you find you're able to do this, and how does that support work?
Yeah, I mean, I think this approach that Tufts developed has really been the core of our success in Boston. And if we meet with leaders, it's looking at really the travel patterns of the patients that we're taking care of, and just seeing how many patients are coming from northern Maine or southern Rhode Island, and then mapping out really what our relationships are like with the other heart failure providers in that area. And we're doing the same with liver transplant now. So, where are there boluses of patients with advanced liver disease, and who are the teams taking care of them? And if they don't have easy access to a transplant program, how can we make ourselves more available to them? And I think that's a philosophical change for transplant centers. Instead of everybody coming to us, it's how do we make ourselves more available and more present in the community, and education and collaboration are really central to that success.
And do you feel like you've the team all is unified in that mission? You've got to have people who physicians who are used to potentially doing care within their walls that are hospitals, going out to tertiary or secondary centers.
Yeah.
And getting the right people. I think it comes back to our conversation at the beginning. Getting the right people who are aligned in the mission must be a very important part of this.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I see with our group, our providers are really proud of the relationships that we've formed in the community and these satellite locations that we've developed. We have unique roles, I think, at Tufts too. We have nurse coordinators who are network and referral managers who really look to make sure that we have strong relationships, that our exchange of information with our partnering programs is clear and accurate and timely. And again, we're finding ways to make this process easier for patients, because having a chronic illness is not easy. And making the amount of appointments and diagnostic tests that we really look to see, are there things that patients can do closer to home that make it easier for them or make it easier for their caregiver who's still working, and then focus on what we actually need to get done at our home base.
So that's fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit about your liver program and what do you see for the future of your liver program?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think our liver program and the opening of our liver program for me has been one of the most rewarding components of my career. Just starting a program from the ground up, I think, has been an experience that you don't often get to have in transplant. But we've recruited some amazing team members, surgical, medical, social workers, dietitians, and I think as our program continues to grow and expand, we're anticipating doing living donor liver transplants this spring, which means hopefully earlier transplant for some of our liver recipients. And I think I'm just excited to see where this program continues to go.
And that, I have to imagine, is a certain amount of leadership challenge to bring people in to set the vision for people about what this could be and coming into something brand new. Anyone who's been part of a startup kind of knows that feeling of telling other people to join in on this thing that doesn't exist yet, but we're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
How did the start of this go? I mean, you're at this point. It's going. It's growing. At the beginning, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was daunting, actually, the challenge of starting up this program. And what's interesting is we really pulled, very experienced transplant team members from so many different organizations. And you learn just how differently every center does little things in transplant. So I think it was interesting to have an opportunity to bring people together and see, how did you do this at your program? And, well, we looked at it this way, and then really taking the best of the best ideas and blending them together. But it was a lot of people who were very like-minded and excited to expand access, excited to do something new. And I think that like-mindedness has kept a really cohesive team.
And that's fantastic also, to be able to start with a blank sheet of paper, blank slate, rather than breaking an entrenched status quo. And I have to imagine also a lot of the people involved must feel real ownership about that they were all part of this, putting this together to this whole new structure, the whole new Tufts way of doing it.
Yeah, we actually celebrated this morning with our nursing leaders, just all the different nurses throughout our organization that have had an impact on transplant, and had a panel of nurses talk about their experience from ICUs to OR to pre-op, and it's been really impressive to see how many dynamic teams were able to align together to make these first transplants happen.
Excellent. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to seeing the program grow and see where you take it from here.
Me too.
And thank you so much for joining today. I really do appreciate you taking the time. It was fantastic to speak with you. You brought so many great insights in terms of leadership and transplantation.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.